My greatest fear is the loss of my independence. I spent a lifetime of taking care of others. And, the idea of loss of the ability to do that, to have to count on others. And even though I'm surrounded by people who love me and want to be there and want to provide that support, but that's what I fear the most. And the only way I can allay those fears gets back to, my affirmations and who I state I am as a person. And I always say the best, defense is oftentimes a good offense. And so I continue to program myself that I'm going to beat the odds on this thing. I am going to make a difference. And stay tuned. We'll see if it happens.
Fear is a wall I must climb, and I've seen some heroes in my day, seen the failures in yours, and I try to...
37 years, I went everywhere the company asked me to go, did everything they asked me to do. You're 12 months away from potentially competing to be the CEO of the company, and you get a diagnosis like this. But it was okay. I was never obsessed with being the CEO of CAT. I was obsessed with doing the right thing in the right way. And at that point in time, the right thing was to step down.
And your Caterpillar career was amazing, extremely impressive. President, slated to be a potential CEO. This is mind-boggling to me. Tell me if I have this right. I thought I read this. 37 years and 2 sick days?
Right, exactly.
Mine would be the exact opposite. I'd have 2 years and 37 sick days, then it'd be kicking me out the door. ALS is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. Most lose the ability to walk, speak, swallow, and breathe. Average survival time after diagnosis is 2 to 5 years, and as of now, there is no cure. My guest, Ed Rapp, was diagnosed in 2015 and is turning over every rock to solve this devastating disease. All right, hey, thank you, Ed. I appreciate you taking the time.
Not a problem.
I know you're being honored by the Les Turner Foundation for your extraordinary work with ALS, humanity at large. What does it mean to you?
The award, for me, all the award is an opportunity to give back to the Les Turner Foundation. I'm part of a bigger cause called Answer ALS. It's driving collaboration across the ALS community. Northwestern was on the outside of that collaboration. They wanted to engage. And as I started to work with them, Northwestern came on board. Les Turner agreed to fund it. And through that, we've broadened the cause. And I remain convinced in this disease state, like any, great innovation is going to come from great collaboration. So for me, tonight's more of a celebration of the Les Turner Foundation and what they've done than anything I'm doing.
Can you just share maybe some of the daily struggles that are so challenging and that make ALS such a difficult disease?
Yeah, if you take the normal profile, I'll just kind of do it through the lens of what the average diagnosis is. You go into your doctor. Most patients, at the time they get diagnosed, it's been about a year since onset where they noticed something wasn't right. My case was dragging a left foot. Others is something with their hand or their bulb or their speech. There's no way to diagnose the disease through an X-ray or MRI or anything else. And so you get there by eliminating everything else.
Okay.
Typically, the last step is when you've not been able to find root cause, they send you to neurology, and that's where you end up with clinical observation that gives you the diagnosis. And the talk is kind of what we got when we were diagnosed is you got 2 to 5 years to live, and it's going to take away your major muscle groups, and the last one being the diaphragm. And when it goes, then you're no longer able to breathe. So that's kind of the journey and the disease. And it's really why the incident rate of ALS is not that much lower than MS. But people know so much less about it because the average lifespan of an ALS patient is much shorter. So you don't have the population of ALS patients that you do MS. probably the fascinating part of the disease, it will take away all your physical capabilities eventually, where all you can move is your eyes, but it leaves your mind. You got total clarity of thought. The challenge is just how do you get it out because you've lost the ability, for speech and others. So in some respects, I always look at it as kind of the opposite of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's takes your mind and leaves your body. ALS leaves your mind, takes your body. And so, yeah, that's the challenge that lies before us.
And then I guess before we get into some other questions, if you go back to the beginning, to your childhood, what kind of kid were you? What kind of childhood did you have?
It couldn't have been better. I mean, I'm one of 7 kids. I have 3 older brothers and 3 younger sisters. And as I've always told my mom, I am the neglected middle child. And her response was always the same: with 7 kids, you're all neglected. Get over it. But the reality of it is, there was no neglect. Now, in the early days, it was 7 kids in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house.
Right.
But it was a strong, faith-based, loving parents. Couldn't be a better way to grow up. In fact, I remember later in life, my mom and dad came to our house. We're having a big dinner with our kids. My dad talked about those early days and trying to get by on what he was making or my mom was making. And our youngest daughter, Stephanie, turned to me and she said, "Dad, I didn't know you were poor when you were young." And my response was, "Neither did I."
Yeah.
I mean, life was good.
It's all relative in perspective, right?
So Pilot Grove, Missouri, population 700, graduated from a class of 30 kids.
Wow.
And then went off to the University of Missouri, and that unlocked.
Seems like a lot of great leaders come from small towns.
It's interesting, Jamie. I think there's something about, that work ethic, ability to relate to people. But I also think sometimes people underestimate the Midwest culture. As I lived and worked for Caterpillar around the world, I think people want to engage with people or leaders that are hands-on, that are willing to get their hands dirty.
Absolutely.
And I think that foundation that you get out of the Midwest, it surely served me well.
Although I grew up in the Midwest and I'm wearing a pink shirt and, can't change a tire. So my dad's disappointed with that.
Yeah, like I said, the next generation, it may be a bigger problem. That's right. That's right.
So do you remember any childhood dreams?
I don't remember the childhood dream. It was the one thing that always, and to this day, I'm not sure, how. But when I interviewed, I was a finance major at Mizzou, and the banks just didn't interest me. I just thought it was the ultimate commodity. A dollar is a dollar, And when Caterpillar came on campus, and I did the research, the annual report, things you do, they had a map of the world in the back of it that showed all their global operations. And for some reason, a kid from Cooper County, Missouri, it just triggered an interest in that global nature of the business. And I asked the recruiter, if you come to work at CAT, is it really possible to experience the globe? And his response was, young man, it's a company, if you work hard and apply yourself, you can see the world and get paid to do it.
Wow.
That's exactly what I did for 37 years.
That's amazing. So you were living your dream. Do you know how many countries or places that?
Yeah, I've been over 100 countries in the world. We lived in Africa, lived in Europe, lived in Asia. So at the end of the day, I got exactly what I signed up for, an opportunity to see the world. And
that's incredible.
And
I've been to like 3 countries. So
yeah.
Canada was one of them.
No.
If you had a time machine and you can go back and talk to yourself as a kid, knowing everything you know now, what do you think you'd want to tell them?
I think I'd tell them to absorb and learn from everything around you. And I went back. I was heavily influenced by this little Catholic, church in this small town, and they had their annual fundraiser for the event, and they asked me to come back and be, a speaker.
I watched that.
And kind of the outline of my talk was everything I've needed to know in my life, I learned in Pilot Grove, Missouri. The strength of a strong faith, the importance of family and loyalty, the strong work ethic. How you get ahead by supporting people versus putting them down. And so I think it's my only advice looking back, and I think it's one of the things, Jamie, that gives me a certain degree of peace in terms of where I'm at now with my life. Is I look back, I don't have regrets. I don't wish I would have grown up in a different environment. I don't wish I had done something else, and professionally, I loved CAT. 1981, I wanted to buy a new car, and I've now been married to the loan officer for 37 years. It's the best
Wow.
deal I ever cut.
That's great.
And so I can sit here, and I'm not saying I did everything right, but I'm very much at peace with the decisions I've made through life and, the opportunities I've had.
That's great, because a lot of people do live with regret. I have regret. I have times when I said something to somebody I shouldn't. I acted, somebody cut me off today. I'm sitting here, pissed off. It's like, it's not worth it, right?
And the thing that I talk to people a lot about in terms of no regret, though, those are the incidents that happen in everyday life. I think the more important perspective to take is just to always be guided by who you want to be in the long term. You talk about if I was to go back to my youth, I'd challenge you to fast forward, to your eulogy. What do you want people to say about the contributions you made? And my wife Ann doesn't like this analogy, but I tell her an ALS diagnosis is like getting to go to your own visitation.
Right.
The crude part of it is a lot of people call an ALS diagnosis a death sentence. And with it, the people that are around you, get to tell you how they feel and also reflect on what kind of person you've been. And I think all of us can benefit from thinking through, when we get to that final
Absolutely.
day, what do we want to be known for?
Yep.
And then the question is based on the way you're living your life today, are you
Right.
taking yourself in that direction or not?
And it sounds like you've been at peace because it sounds like you, for the most part, always have.
Yeah, the reality is I've been surrounded by a bunch of good people, and I've been smart enough to understand it and take full advantage of it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So pre-diagnosis, what fulfilled you most? What made you the happiest?
I loved, two aspects in terms of my life, and always worked hard to keep balance between the two. I absolutely loved my career at CAT. The part I got the most out of was, just getting the most out of the people around you. Providing clarity of direction, helping them understand the core values that we're going to, execute accordingly, and then making good things happen. My favorite jobs were the toughest, turning around a significant part of the business, being over the finance part of the Caterpillar during the global financial crisis. I loved being in the heat of those challenging moments. And the other part is, while I always took great pride in what I achieved at CAT, it always paled in comparison to what Ann and I had in terms of our personal life. With Ann, like I said, married for 37 years, 3 wonderful kids, in-laws, now 3 grandsons.
Wow.
And I always understood that at some point in time, my career was going to come to an end. I came earlier than I anticipated with the diagnosis, but I always knew that at that point in time, then you're just a normal member of society, and
Right.
you got to make sure that the people that mean the most of you, you mean the most to them. And so, keeping that balance in my life was, and it's that.
I know you always wrote about strike the balance, too.
That's right. And trust me, let's be 37 years. I went everywhere the company asked me to go, did everything they asked me to do. You're 12 months away from potentially competing to be the CEO of the company, and you get a diagnosis like this. But it was okay.
Yeah.
I was never obsessed with being the CEO of CAT. I was obsessed with doing the right thing the right way. And at that point in time, the right thing was to step down.
And I want to touch on that in a second, but your Caterpillar career was amazing, extremely impressive. President, slated to be a potential CEO. I think this is mind-boggling to me. Tell me if I have this right. I thought I read this. 37 years and 2 sick days?
Right, exactly.
Mine would be the exact opposite. I'd have 2 years and 37 sick days, then it'd be kicking me out the door. So how did you have that level of commitment and to excellence?
Well, we are all products of the environment we were raised in. And I take it back to, the roots of growing up Piley Road, Missouri. We did chores before school and headed off to the bus. And if we ever came down and told our mom, and you should think about this, she had 7 kids trying to run a house, and we came down and said, yeah, I'm sick. Her response was, go back upstairs, go to bed, and don't come down until you feel better. She just didn't have time.
Yeah, she was tough.
At school, we had the annual attendance awards for perfect attendance. I was competitive by my nature. And I think you build those habits, and then those habits just And I think that's a key part of life. How do you build habits that lead to your success? And I've been working hard on that, since those early days.
Prior to your diagnosis, how did you know that something was potentially wrong?
Yeah, I always, proper diet, exercise, and so December of 2014, we came to North Carolina. Two of our three kids lived there at the time for the family vacation between Christmas and New Year's, out jogging with my son because we'd run every time we were together. And all of a sudden, about every 15 steps, my left toe would catch.
Okay.
And I'd just come off of a plane from Asia, thought I had a pinched nerve or something like that. But as I got into 2015, it got harder to jog, and the issue was getting a little bit worse. And then I went on the journey, like I said, that most ALS patients go on, eliminating everything else until I got to Mayo Clinic in November of 2015. And after 3 days of tests, the doctor pulls me in and says, "Hey, you got ALS." And there's many things about that conversation, that will forever remain etched in my memory. It was, first of all, my wife Ann said, "What should we do?" And his response, "You should make a list of every place in the world you've ever wanted to go, and you should go now." And my response was, "I've already been there." And so it didn't take me long to figure out that instead of going places, we were going to do a shift. I mean, I wanted to be with family and close to them, but we also decided that we've got a responsibility to try to make a difference in what is a tough disease.
So, I mean, you're on top of the world, professionally, personally. The doctor says you have ALS. I can't imagine many things more terrifying than hearing those three words. How do you process that?
Yeah, I mean, that's when you just lean on, the things that got you through. I mean, my faith, is never. People sometimes ask, when did you find your faith? And mine was there upon delivery. I mean, I just grew up in a family that it was a pillar of kind of who we are. And so that was a big part of it. The other one that I've always used in my life are affirmations, in combination with prayer. I sometimes think that, we exercise, we diet, we do all the things to take care of ourselves, and I think the most underutilized part of our body is sometimes our mind. And I've just always been a little bit of a student of how do you use the mind to shape where you want to be. And so I've always had affirmations that talk about life in the future tense. So at CAT, I used to have affirmations like, I'm a group president known for my leadership development and communication skills, as well as my ability to balance between home and work and build great leaders in those around me. And talking about who I wanted to be as a person. But I was diagnosed on November 5th, and on November 7th, I rewrote my affirmations. And so now they're more focused on the challenge at hand. I am the exception. I outlived my parents and my in-laws. Wow. I grow older with Ann. Yeah. I walk my daughters down the aisle, which I've now done. Wow. I teach my grandkids to play golf, and I walk the course the first time Cole beats Jay. And that's our grandson Cole beating our son. I affirm every day that there is no disease that's evolved, that our Creator will not help in finding a cure. I increase awareness and attract investment, supporting those in search of a cure, and those bringing better assistive technologies to those that suffer from the disease.
I mean, did you ever, like Lou Gehrig said, I'm the luckiest man alive. I think he's hinting at, or he hinted at what you are hinting at, which is, I've had a great life, and I'm going to fight this the best way that I can. But did you ever think, why me, and why would God put this upon me, maybe?
The why me, no.
Okay.
And a lot of people, make comments like, God did this to you so you can make a difference in the world of ALS. That's not the way I translate it. What I think is that God didn't do this to me, but He's going to help me through it. And when I process it, the one thing that I'm aware of, and I remind people on a regular basis, I hate to inform you, but none of us are going to get out of this thing alive. And, I think at the end of the day, we're all going to be measured by the contributions that we make. Now, my timeline may be a bit more defined than most, but I think anybody needs to reflect on, at the end, we're not going to be measured by events, occurrences, or even a diagnosis. We're going to be measured by the contributions we make. And at the end of the day, all I'm after is a passing grade.
This really seems to be about perspective. When you break it all down, what is life about? What's really important?
To me, it's that, we have a family vision statement that in many respects maybe says it all for us. And
That's amazing that you have a family vision statement. That just tells you like who you are. You're a business guy.
It drives my wife and kids nuts sometimes. But our family vision statement, we will positively impact the people and responsibilities experienced throughout life. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about it, you get a diagnosis like this, I could have easily just said, well, I'm going to go to, retire to Raleigh, North Carolina, spend my time with family and friends, play golf as long as I can play. But if you got a vision statement that says positively impact the people and responsibilities experienced throughout life, it just tells you we had an accountability to the population of ALS patients to do more.
That's interesting because I used to do that where I put a piece of tape on the ground before I went to my office just as a reminder.
Yeah.
It was a line in the sand. And was I going towards that mission and vision or was I going against it?
Yeah.
And it would just constantly be there to remind me. And it changes as time goes on.
No.
Just going back to Caterpillar real quick, 37 years there, you had to face some heavy challenges, major adversity there. I'd love to hear about a couple of those, how you responded to them.
Yeah.
And then if they also helped you in this battle against ALS.
Yeah, like I said, I enjoy going into challenging areas. We moved to South Africa about 8 months before the transition to the Mandela government. And so having to manage through that transition period from a business perspective was fascinating. We were in Europe during the launch of the euro and the complexities that came from a business perspective of deploying. But the two that really stand out for me was one, taking over a troubled business that most people thought we could never compete in and turning that business around. And then being over the finance side of CAT during the global financial crisis.
Man.
And that's, there was a little bit, we're all wired differently, but, when it got to that kind of crunch time, at the end of the basketball game, give me the ball. And I love being in the middle of it. And I think the thing that I learned, in the global financial crisis, one of the things I used to tell our employees is remain calm, do not stand up in your canoe. And we're not the first generation of leaders that's dealing with crisis. Those that have gone before us have navigated through choppy waters as well. This just happens to be our turn. And so I think, understanding that managing crisis starts with a calm, thoughtful approach in terms of how you're going to handle it is, I've been able to translate that into, the world of ALS. Trust me, given a choice, this is not the path I would have been on. But it is what it is. And so how do you make the most out of it? And, that's exactly what we're trying to do.
And what are some of the methods you use to combat fear and perform under pressure so well?
To me, I get back to, in many respects, we're all products of the environment we're raised in. When you're the youngest of 4 boys, you're always getting pushed around, knocked around. And I always was. And I think there's a part of me that competitive spirit was always, I was fighting uphill from the day I could walk.
Wow.
And so I think that just got grounded into kind of who I am. Yeah, and then I think I combined it with, if I look at leadership today, I think, there are a lot of brilliant people, in positions of leadership. But in my mind, you've got to take the understanding of the business and strategy, you've got to combine it with getting people to really want to follow you and let them know you are authentic and you really do care. And then you gotta bring in a level of discipline, the discipline of choice and where are your priorities and what are you going to focus on. And I think those are the things that I tried to bring to the world of Caterpillar. And the reality of it is, it's the same skill set that we're trying to apply to ALS.
And we touched on this briefly, but just how vital is for facing adversity, just attitude, mindset?
For me, it's everything. And I say that for a couple reasons. First of all, ALS, the disease itself, in many ways, is as much of a mental challenge as it is a physical challenge. I mean, my legs and the stiffness, every step I take, I have to think, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. If I don't concentrate on the basics of walking, I fall. And so with every step, I'm reminded of the disease. And so that brings about, a significant mental challenge where, how do you keep it from wearing you down?
Yeah.
And that's where affirmations and other things about, trying to make a difference in what is a tough disease comes into play.
Do you have any favorite affirmations? Did they change over time? Any that you recall?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've changed consistently. As I said earlier, from the days of Cat, the affirmations were focused on what kind of leader I wanted to be, what kind of balance I wanted to have in my life. And today I affirm to the fact that I am the exception and outlive my parents and in-laws and grow old with Ann.
I know you said this is a half-full diagnosis as well, which ties into what we're talking about.
Yeah, okay, let's ALS diagnosis is a bad deal, but, it wasn't a heart attack. It wasn't a plane crash or a car. I mean, I get to tell Ann how much I love her. I get to engage with my kids. I get to, know my grandsons.
Yeah.
So, and as I said earlier, everybody in life deals with adversity. And sometimes as you engage with society, you see people and you think they've got life totally under control, but they got their challenges just as well.
What would you say to someone that has just a major adversity, a thunderbolt that strikes them out of nowhere? How do you process that, and how do you choose the correct response?
Yeah, for me, it's, first of all, just to take the step back and understand, the realities of the challenge at hand. Yeah, and I think you've got to fully absorb that and come to grips with it. But then the next step is you got to keep it in perspective. Like I said, an ALS diagnosis is pretty tough, but I look and see and come across people that deal with significant challenges of their own. And so another one is, if you don't have faith, find it. And back to my earlier point, none of us are going to get out of this thing alive. And I think if you can have that understanding that there is something beyond this part of the journey, it gives you more strength to deal with the challenge at hand. The other one, as we talked about, I think you've got to program yourself, to take on the challenge, and that's where affirmations have always been key. The last one that's really important to me is, I'm not the only one that has the challenge associated with my diagnosis. I mean, I got, a wife that I love who, whenever I asked her to go, did everything I asked her to do, and now her view of retirement is now as a caregiver. I got 3 kids that always looked at me as being the pillar of strength, and, and now they see me struggling to walk. And so a big part of my, if you would, the strength I garner to fight the disease is to demonstrate to them that I'm all in. Now, this thing could turn south and not turn out the way I'd want it. But if it does, I want them to be able to reflect and say, he went down swinging and he made a difference along the way.
And then in terms of, I always think preparation diminishes fear. Is, in a business, you can prepare for adversities in advance. There's a semblance of control.
Yeah.
Even though things happen like '08.
Right.
Can you prepare for ALS?
Well, yeah, as I said, I've just come across very few people in life who don't deal with a curveball at some point in time. And my, position's always been, is the time to start preparing for it is not when it leaves the pitcher's hand. It's how you live and lead each and every day. And so, do you live, with a clear vision of the type of person you want to be? Do you have habits that endear you to the people around you? Do you find balance in your life, not only succeeding professionally or personally? And yeah, I think the best way to prepare for the ultimate adversity that we're all going to face is how you live and lead your life on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
The time to find your faith or your relationship with your spouse or your relationship with your kid is not the day that you get diagnosed.
And you're right. I think I do this all the time where I push things off, maybe saying I love you to somebody or,
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I'll be around tomorrow.
Right.
Maybe not.
Maybe
right?
not. Maybe not. And
seize the day
Yeah.
and have some gratitude.
Yeah, I went back to the University of Missouri and did the commencement speech, and it was about no regrets. And one of the pieces of advice I gave him was, put down in writing, to the people that have got you to this point in time, how much you care, how much you appreciate. And it may have been a teacher.
Right.
It's an interesting story. When I was in the second grade, we moved from Pilot Grove, Missouri to Boonville, 12 miles away. But for me, it was like moving forever. And we moved back a few years later. Middle of the second grade, though, and I revolted. I ran away from school, didn't like the teacher, and it was obvious she didn't like me either. Get to the end of my second grade year, and she decides she wants to hold me back and make me repeat the second grade. Now, my mom and dad knew I was struggling with the change.
Sure.
And so they said, there's got to be a better way. And they said, okay, here's the deal.
Yeah.
If he goes to summer school and does well, he can go on to third grade. If he doesn't, we'll have to repeat. So here I am, summer, brothers and sisters are off playing. I got to go to summer school. And it all changed the minute I walked through the door. There was a young teacher. It was her first year of teaching. And she made it fun for me. And she gave me the confidence that I could do it. And I never looked back.
That's amazing.
Got A's the rest of it, and graduated with honors. 45 years after the fact, we're back in my hometown, and we're at church, and my mom says, you know who the lady is up ahead of us? And I said, no. And she goes, that's the sister
Wow.
of your teacher from second grade
Holy
summer
cow.
school. So going home, I was telling my wife the story, and it just triggered the thought. So I called my mom, and I said, listen, get the sister's address. And I wrote her a letter. And I said, listen, here's my story and the impact you have. And I said, you probably don't remember me, but I used to bring you a rose every day. My mom had a rose garden.
Yeah.
And I said, I just wanted you to know the kind of impact you had. And I got the most amazing letter back to her. She said, I've just retired from teaching. And she says, one of the questions I've asked myself is, did I ever make a difference? And she says, now I know.
That probably meant the world to her, too.
So your point is, say what you need to say to the people that mean the most. And this diagnosis gives me the time to do that.
And what would you say, the whole topic of what I'm working on is fear, depression, anxiety. And this is a little bit redundant, I'm sure, but what would you tell someone that is feeling afraid to face the future? There's impending doom, they're depressed, they're hopeless. Maybe they're, they feel like giving up. What kind of advice would you give to somebody that is feeling that way?
First of all, I can't relate to it, and therefore, I'm not sure I can give good advice. Sure. But the thing that I've always tried to do is, if you take on any challenge at hand, I suggest you just develop a good plan. First of all, articulate, who do you want to be as a person? Build those into affirmations in the future state. And stating that I have no fear, that I embrace challenge.
I love that.
And repeat it each and every day, and then make sure that the habits you have in terms of your daily lifestyle take you in that direction. The other one is, that when I was diagnosed, doctor says you got 2 to 5 years to live, and the only drug out there extends life 2 to 5 months, and I said to him, okay, how do we fight it with diet, exercise, other things? He says it doesn't work that way. He said, you're going to come back here every 3 months. I'm going to measure your breathing and your strength. I'll get 3 data points, and from that, I'll give you a rough estimate on how long you're going to live. And I just told him, I just don't work that way. And so I think, the other part for me is I'm a firm believer in, discipline relative to your diet, your exercise. I'm gluten-free, I'm dairy-free, processed sugar-free, limited caffeine, limited alcohol. And it gets back to trying to get your body back to the Homo sapien state in the way you were originally designed.
What would you tell someone that maybe or is this probably out of your realm, but that's depressed and maybe medication versus a more holistic approach, affirmations and things?
I got to be very careful here, because there's people that has that change. But the thing I would say is, while pursuing the medical approach, I would definitely pursue a holistic approach. I'm a big believer in Chinese medicine, which has a basic premise that the body is designed to heal itself when given the right set of circumstances. And I think in today's society, with all the things that we take in, all the toxins that we take in, I think it's going to be interesting to see 20 to 30 years from now how society looks at the changes we've made. Obesity in the U.S. is on a rapid increase.
Yep.
You know, I think last year, for the first time in history, we had a decline in the average age expectancy, which
Wow.
in a modern society shouldn't be the case. And we debate healthcare, but we debate it from a perspective of how do we share the cost instead
Right.
of how do we eliminate, if you would, the need.
So in terms of nutrition, are there some specifics, things you eat, some specifics that you
Yeah,
could
I
share?
mean it's a pretty straightforward, gluten-free, dairy-free. So heavy on greens, vegetables, heavy on bright fruits, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, those kinds of things. Range-free chicken, fresh caught fish, grass-fed beef. Just trying to take toxins
Sure.
and preservatives out of the system. I mean, when we lived in Geneva, Switzerland, we lived in a small village called Beignet. And about 10 minutes before dinner, my wife would holler out the door, "Hey, run to the local patisserie
Sure.
and get a loaf of bread."
Yeah.
So one of the kids would hop on their bike, they'd go in, and we'd sit down and have dinner. Fresh bread, hot, right out of the oven from the local patisserie. The next morning, you could take that piece of bread and you could drive a nail, hard as a rock.
Right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because it had no preservatives.
Right.
And when you can put something on your shelf and go back there 30 days later and it's still, I mean, most people look at that as convenience. I look at it as a problem.
I agree.
Yeah.
And this is, I have a feeling what you're going to say here, and this is what's amazing about you. I would imagine, given this diagnosis, there had to be, everybody's human.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest leaders in history, George Washington, they're not immune to fear and anxiety. Can you describe any vulnerable moments that people can identify with where you just felt afraid and scared and hopeless, that type of thing?
Yeah, I think there's two things that were the hardest. One was, Anne was with me, but you get three kids that love you. To sit down and explain to them,
Right.
a diagnosis like this was hard. The only other time that I really kind of broke down was actually when I was writing my retirement announcement to Kat, and it was more around a sense of letting down the people that had done so much to support me throughout my career. But Jamie, I don't know. I mean, it's the way I'm wired. It was the way I'm raised. But it didn't take me long.
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, can I change it? No. Can I ever figure out why I got the diagnosis? No. And I think as I got older, I always became a little bit better about worrying about the things I can control versus focusing on those things that I can't. I can't change the diagnosis. I can't change the progression. I mean, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to develop a good battle plan. I'm going to, focus on my exercise, focus on my diet, focus on making a difference.
So is it a choice between fighting or quitting, right?
I mean,
to make it simple.
It's funny. Peoria is a very small community. Cat headquarters were there, and my father-in-law, my dad and my father-in-law are probably the two that were most distraught on the fact that maybe I didn't get to finish out at Cat the way it was originally planned. But my father-in-law came down for our daughter's wedding and stayed for a couple weeks afterwards, and we were having a talk, and he said he was at church and he was talking to some of his Cat colleagues, and they talked about my situation, and one of the guys said, "It's such a sad story." And I told him, Dale, I don't look at it that way. I mean, the reality of it is, for 37 years, I really do think I made a difference at Cat. And, for a farm boy from Missouri to make a difference in a global company like that, I consider it a pretty significant achievement. If now I can make a difference in the world of ALS, I think when the ultimate day comes and I can look back and say, I made a difference in those areas while also having a great family, I'm gonna look at it and say it's a pretty good body of work.
Is it Greg Oberhelm, the CEO?
Doug Oberhelm.
Doug. So I was talking to Garrett yesterday, and he told me a story that I think you told Doug about your diagnosis, which was heavy, obviously. And I think he said, well, why did you just do that presentation?
Right.
Like you finished a presentation that day.
We'd been in a morning meeting
And he
all
said you
morning.
worked harder than any person he's ever had, by far.
Well, when you're
Garrett called you a machine. He's like, that guy. He goes, if anybody's going to solve ALS, it's
when you're a
gonna be
farm
Ed
boy
Rapp.
from Missouri, you develop some good habits. And no, but I mean, one of the things that I keep in perspective, I look at young people that get this disease that aren't in a position where they could retire. I look at where their kids are young. I mean, ours are out of college and have their lives under the way. Those are the ones.
What do you tell somebody day one when they have the diagnosis? What do you tell them?
You know what I take them through kind of the protocol and the discussion. First of all, I don't want to welcome you to the fraternity. It's the last one any of us want to join, but the reality is you're here. And I talk about, spend all the time you need to come into grips with that, but then let's talk about where you're going to go from here. I talk about my protocol that I follow.
Sure.
But a key point I always make, to them is, I had a very close friend in the world of ALS named Jay Fishman, who was a great mentor for me. He was diagnosed a couple of years before me, has since passed away. But I'll never forget going to his funeral. And his funeral was a celebration of his life.
Sure.
And the reason it was a celebration of his life, because the attitude he took as he fought the disease and his attempt to make a difference. And I tell newly diagnosed patients, if you go to a dark place and you drag everybody around you into that dark place, it's not going to be a celebration.
What good is that doing anybody, right?
That's right. So,
how about if you could be ALS free for one day, what would you do? How would you spend it?
I'd walk 18 holes of golf with my son and grandson, because I'm still trying. I still play golf. Still play to about a 11 or 12 handicap.
Wow.
But I had to move up on the tees and some other things. But that freedom of that, I'd go. When I'm driving down the road and see somebody out for a morning jog, I was a 3 to 4 mile morning jogger forever.
Wow.
And I miss that freedom of doing it. So it'd be doing those activities that today, my son and I used to have epic tennis battles. Maybe one more tennis game, but I don't think about that often.
You don't have dreams where you feel like you're...
I have dreams of where I sense and feel my gait improving. And, I think that's because, I affirm every morning that, as I kneel at the feet of the Lord Jesus, he puts his hands on my head. And powered by prayer from around the world and those in heaven, he builds my strong and dynamic nervous system, feeds my muscles, and improves my balance and gait. And, I pray intently. And I think there's times where I get the sense that perhaps the prayers are going to be answered.
From all the research I've done on ALS, it seems like technology is vital. Can you mention the impact that technology's had on people's lives, the way they live their lives, versus prior to some of these advancements?
I tell you, I think that technology on assistive technologies is going to be, have an impact, and it gives an ALS patient a greater sense of independence. The ability from your eyes to control your house temperature, music, move your wheelchair. I think there's great opportunities there. But I think the bigger opportunity is actually some of the work we're trying to do through Answer ALS and the use of capabilities that weren't here 10 years ago. And let me give you some examples. 10 years ago, to sequence a human genome cost $1 million and took 4.5 months. Today, it costs less than $1,000, and you can do it in an hour.
Wow, that's incredible.
10 years ago, the cost of storing large amounts of data was expensive. Today, it's cost efficient. In fact, we just do it in the cloud. 10 years ago, the concept of iPS cells was just being developed. Today, from my blood, they can recreate my motor neuron in an embryonic state, giving researchers what they never had in the past. And that's, in essence, a biopsy of the brain. 10 years ago, the amount of collaboration between institutions was limited. Today, there's mass, collaboration.
It's like Nelson Mandela said, everything seems impossible until someone does it.
Right. And so a big part of anti-ALS is taking all those emerging technologies and then applying it to the problem. So 1,000 patients, 5 billion data points on each patient, 24 research centers and 8 clinical institutions collaborating to do it, putting it all on one platform and making it available to anybody doing research on ALS in the world in an open source.
So if you had to boil it down, what was the core problem? It seemed fractured.
Well, I think
many-
the hypothesis we're trying to prove out is that there is not one form of the disease. It's like cancer. There's multiple subgroups. I mean, mine started in the left leg, and it's got a profile in terms of progression. The next person starts in his right hand, the next one in the bulbar region. Most people, I mean, some people go in a year or two, some go to 5, why? And I think it's because there's a different pathway that's been affected.
Well, Stephen Hawking lived like 50 years.
That's right. Until you understand the pathway, I come from an engineering company. Until you understand root cause, any solution is a shot in the dark. And that's what we're trying to use. Use big data, analytics, machine learning, AI, to analyze this mass data set, to understand. As I say, we're building the haystack, and then we're going to let data scientists, AI, machine learning discover the needle. What are the individual subgroups that cause this disease? Because until we do that, I think any drug trial is a bit of a shot in the dark.
Yeah, because so far there's no cure, there's no treatment, but just the advancements though. The research I did was technology, but I think it was Steve Gleason was driving just with his eyes, and he's got 5,000 sentences in a voice bank.
Right.
And just the communication that offers, because if you're depressed, if you're anxious,
right,
it's gonna. If you're isolated, if you didn't have these technologies, you can't tell your kid you love them. You can't write a speech at a wedding.
Right.
You can't, as you are, encouraging the planet with your words. I mean, it's amazing. So, if you look at some advancements that have happened just in the last 5 years, why can't there be something in the next?
We're just untapping the capabilities. To me, I'm convinced if you talk to an ALS patient, the number one thing that they struggle with is the ability to communicate. Mm-hmm. I was with Steve and Michelle Gleason, and we were talking about assistive technologies and where we need to focus on in terms of the biggest advancements. Michelle said speech because she said when we get in an argument, it takes him forever to respond.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can imagine what's going to be out there. I'll give you an example. In 1993, we moved to Johannesburg, South Africa, and we bought both of our parents a fax machine because phone lines were incredibly unreliable and very expensive. And so that's how we communicated by letter. 20 years later, we moved to Singapore, and we bought both of our parents an iPad, and we FaceTimed Singapore Saturday night, family farm Saturday morning, live, uninterrupted. And at the end of every conversation, my dad would say the same thing. There's no way this is free. So in 1993, if I would have told you, you know what, in the next 20 years, there's going to be a capability where you're going to be able to dial up anybody in the world, see them live on a screen, talk to them uninterrupted, and it's all going to be free, you would have said you're out of your mind.
You wouldn't believe it. It's like the Jetsons.
Right. So don't tell me what's possible in terms of the next 20 years. So who knows what the future holds? And I just hope to be around for long enough to get to see some of it.
This is one other stat I had, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the ventilator, is it 95% of people opt out of?
Yeah, and this gets back to the issue of assistive technologies. You get to the point where your body fails, last things go in, is the diaphragm, and 95% of people opt out, and it's because of, I think, 2 things. One is lack of quality of life. Because at that point in time, all you've got your eyes, and there's technologies, but it's a tough row. I think the other part of it is, for a lot of people, the affordability of 24-hour care, and so, but that's the biggest decision every ALS patient has to make at some point in time, to go on the vent or not. But with the use of technologies that exist today, as you say, the vast majority of people are opting out. And I think that's something we ought to be able to fix.
And then how do you, if someone is, they don't have the resources, what do they do in terms of technology? Is it accessible to everybody?
And that's why we're here. That's what the likes of Les Turner Foundation, Team Gleason, and others, do, is providing those home services to those that aren't in a position where they can do it themselves. And that's why I'm here. It isn't about an award. It's about supporting a bunch of people who take care of people who need that help.
At Caterpillar, you always talked about, I want to define winning, the outcome. And you had a clear vision. Is that, how do you define winning in terms of ALS?
To me, where I'm at in this phase of my journey, my definition of winning in ALS is to discover the subgroups that make up this disease. Because until you understand the subgroups or pathway, as I said earlier, I think any drug trial is absolutely shot in the dark. Some people say, well, the ultimate measure of winning is a cure. Yeah, but you gotta get the first domino set to drop first, and that's discovering the subway. So the other thing is, I'm realistic about the timeline between pathway discovery and research and then drug trials and then getting on the market. The reality of it is that timeline is probably longer than I've got. So the question that you got to ask yourself is, are you going to leave the place better than you found it? And if I can play a role in leading and leaving the organization with the clarity on those subgroups, those pathways, then I'll consider it a job well done.
I'm only going to push you on this one more time, just because I deal with a lot of fear.
Yep.
And it's amazing. You seem fearless, and maybe you are. Do you have moments of fear where you're afraid, and if you do, what do you do with it?
My greatest fear is the loss of my independence. I spent a lifetime of taking care of others, and the idea of loss of the ability to do that, to have to count on others. And even though I'm surrounded by people who love me and want to be there and want to provide that support, but that's what I fear the most. And the only way I can allay those fears gets back to my affirmations and who I state I am as a person. And I always say the best defense is oftentimes a good offense. And so I continue to program myself that I'm going to beat the odds on this thing. I am going to make a difference, and stay tuned. We'll see if it happens or not.
Jackie Robinson said a life is unimportant except for the impact it's had on other lives. I want to thank you for taking the time and for making everybody else's lives better. Thank you.
Well, it goes back to the family vision. Will positively impact the people and responsibilities experienced throughout life. For a long time, I thought that was in the world of CAT and leadership and family, and it turned out to be ALS as well. And we're going to stay strong. You do the same.
Thank you very much.